Good evening, I'm Bronwyn Maddox from Chatham House. Welcome to this evening, highly charged post-dinner session on the West-West divide, the rift within the West. Does the West still exist? I've got a terrific panel here, you can see them displayed up above us, to discuss all of this. And I'm going to leave lots of time for questions because I'm sure there will be lots of questions. We've had a great warm-up for this today, indeed, this year, indeed, in the past year. This question, which really has been at the heart of this Munich Security Conference, helped by the shadowy elephants lumbering at us out of the screens, encouraging us to discuss the elephant in the room that has felt as if it is in the room, the question of whether the West still hangs together as a set of countries, a set of interests, a set of values to address the problems of the world. And we're going to plunge right in talking about this, but I'm conscious that we may go over all kinds of questions that have woven their way through today, whether it is responses to Gaza, responses to Ukraine, a lot of the world saying to what we've called the West, look, you expect us to act one way in Ukraine, and then we don't see those same values you invoke represented in how you behave on Israel and Gaza. And it's going to throw us right at the heart of the questions that took up the opening sessions of today. The US, China, and key European leaders setting out their values and indeed their policies of how they intended to respond to all kinds of questions in the world. So welcome to my panel, welcome to you all. Let me start right at the end with Gladden Papin from Hungary. And I would love you to kick us off with your response to this question of, does the West still exist, or is there a fatal rift within the West? Good evening.
Thank you so much. What an easy question to start off with. Well, I decided to cheat a little bit, and I reread the preamble to the NATO treaty. And it's actually very interesting. No.
Former professor, and I've said sort of 2 minutes.
Yeah. And so here's a 45-minute lecture. It says they are determined to safeguard their liberty, common heritage, and civilization of their peoples. And I think that is something that's very interesting because each one of those things is important. It makes up what the West is, but the freedom, common heritage, and civilization of the West have also come under threat recently. The only problem is that threat has been perceived by many people to come primarily from conservative, right-wing, and nationally oriented parties. And I think one advantage of this night's discussion is that that has expanded a little bit. We actually need to take into consideration that perspective in order to see how the Trump administration is understanding what the core of the shared alliance is, and how each of these things, the freedom, the common heritage, and the civilization, needs to be preserved.
All right, thank you very much. And because Gladden's name is sort of down behind Secretary Clinton, let me say he's Gladden Papin, President and Chair of the Board, Hungarian Institute of International Affairs from Budapest. Thank you for that opening remark. Let's turn next to Radosław Sikorski from Poland. Does the West still exist?
Of course it does, but there have always been differences. So let me tell you that when I arrived in Washington to work there at a think tank 20 years ago, I thought of myself as a conservative. And then I discovered that, and I'm a pro-defense kind of guy, and I discovered that if you believe in gun ownership, but with a license, you know, with some psychiatric tests and a sort of police nod, that makes you a commie. And then I discovered that if you believe in universal health care, that makes you a double commie. And it's got worse. So we have a genuine civilizational difference on how we understand freedom of speech. In the United States, it's almost absolute. It's almost impossible to win a case of defamation or libel.
We might come on to that point.
But wait, let me get to the end of my argument. Whereas in Europe, for good historical reasons, so for example in Poland, it is forbidden to speak up on behalf of fascism and communism for very good historical reasons. We believe in freedom of speech with responsibility. And what happened here a year ago was that the Vice President of the United States was telling us that our notion of free speech was censorship. And I just don't accept that. And so the difficulty we now have is that one side of the Atlantic is trying to impose its values on the other, and that's unacceptable.
All right, thank you very much for that. We'll come back exactly to those points of values. Secretary Clinton.
Well, I think that the way you pose the question really suggests the answer. There are very significant differences of opinion as to define certain fundamental rights, how they are to be applied. Radek just talked about a few of them, and how we are to define freedom in whatever way we can in order to enhance human rights, human dignity. And it's going to be debatable, and I see nothing wrong with that. I mean, all of this hand-wringing about the West, whether we live or we don't, whether it's, falling apart, I see it as a very almost healthy debate. Because if people are not thinking about what their rights are and should be, if they're not willing to stand up and claim them, even if we have differences, then that to me is the great civilizational challenge. I just want to see that debate carried out without intimidation, fear, bullying, and cancellation. I want to see people be able to have a vigorous debate about where we stand on these issues. And I think part of the reason we're having this question is because there's been the rise of a somewhat muscular form of, rightism, not so conservative as much as populist, nationalist, which has posed challenges to a lot of the post-war consensus. And now people have to make decisions at the ballot box in their own communities about how they define, these very clear points about what freedom and values mean to us and how we're going to live together going forward. Because the alternative, which I hope we get to, is, to me, totally unacceptable.
Well, we will get to all kinds of things, and I'm getting more points by the minute, but thank you very much for that. Let me come to Peter Macinka, from the Czech Republic, Deputy Prime Minister. Your response to this question?
So, does the West still exist? Was the question. So, I think the West is probably no longer the unified civilization, but it's rather a place with a contested territory of values. So, on one hand, we see the concept of West as a civilization of freedom. On the other hand, we see the West as a project of some progressivist globalization. So I see the West divided. On one hand, is the freedom or equality. It's between the conservative points of view and progressivism. And I think these two conceptions are against each other. And I think people should probably learn to listen to each other, because the gap is wider and wider, and this is
the gap between what?
Yeah, the gap between those two concepts. One is traditional or conservative. The second is more progressive, and one is about some sovereignty, national sovereignty. The second is about supranationality. I see the divided West between conservatism, progressivism, which rejects the traditions and brings us to some artificial concept of social engineering. I'm the conservative politician, so I see some dangers of the progressivist way of thinking.
May I interject?
Yes, you may, because already we're getting useful disagreement on exactly...
It's not true that globalization was a progressivist idea. It was a business idea. It was tinged with racism. You know, we'll do all the clean jobs and we'll export all the dirty jobs to China and elsewhere. And it was an idea about maximizing profits.
Radek, one could challenge that and say, look, it was also one that brought in prosperity for much of the much of the world. Let me bring in, just to give everyone a first shot at this, Ivan Krastev from Bulgaria.
Yeah. So, can I give an example with an old Soviet joke? So, because in a certain way, does the West exist or not was also very much how you see it from outside. And what is happening now, to be honest, is that we look like this guy who was very much basically pushed in the corner by a gangster and said, "Are you with us or against us?" And the guy said, "For sure I am with you." But they said the wrong answer, "We are them." And I'm saying this because in a certain way, we have to have, not that the West does not exist, we start to have too many of them. And in a certain way, different political actors, we have the Cold War West, which was very much the West as the free world. It was contested. We have the West as civilization, but then the problem is who is in and who is out. Basically, who belongs to this West as a place. And I'm saying all this because as a result of it, you have a really major division, not simply between the United States and Europe. The division goes in every single country. And as a result of it, I do believe that this is becoming much more difficult and different. But there is a great book being written this year, published by a Greek guy who is teaching in London School of Economics, called "The West: A History of an Idea." And his major argument was that there was one characteristic that stay with the idea of the West when you start from the mid-19th century, when, by the way, the idea came, and this was the pluralistic nature of the West. The West was, in a way, always asking themselves, who are we? And from this point of view, probably we're not in such an unusual situation. It's a slightly painful one, but it's it.
All right, so we have two ideas running already. One is that the West represented a block of ideas, the free world, against the Soviet Union, if you like. Ideas particularly based on human rights, on individual liberty, which most countries in the world signed up to, but about half the world really embraced after the Second World War. And then we have a second set of ideas, really, which Peter brought in, about whether this is a battle of ideas, a newer or different battle of ideas between conservatism and liberalism, one in which the US, under its current administration, says we are absolutely a country of values. The challenge thrown down by Marco Rubio this morning, saying we're with you provided you're with us according to these values which we espouse. And I'd like to get back to the panel and just see again, we had a sort of a degree of international conference agreement, first round, if I can put it that way, until we got into the second half of this. I'd just like to hear again from the panel whether you think that the US, under its current administration, is making a new difference, is making a new rift, or whether it's articulating a rift that was always there within the issue of the West. Go on, please. Gladden.
After the end of the Cold War, I think what happened is that there were certain commitments of a more progressive nature that were brought into the victorious system. And although there were many different aspects of the post-war rule of law system that worked, eventually these got steadily skewed in a certain direction. And it's not just a left-right thing, it's also about where those decisions were made, less and less in national governments speaking for their citizens, and more in transnational bodies or transcontinental bodies even. And so those two things led to a distortion. But one thing that really happened is that conservative voices who were criticizing this were basically excluded from elite institutions. They were not participants in many of these debates. What's happened as a result, I think this is an opinion broadly shared by the more conservative and nationally oriented parties on both sides of the Atlantic, is that set of commitments wore down fundamental strengths of the West. The family was worn down, borders were worn down, industrial strength was worn down, and that injures our ability even to maintain the commitments that we all made in the NATO treaty.
All right, so thanks for saying that. So you're echoing a bit of what Peter was saying about this being a battle between conservatism and liberalism.
And on the where decisions are
What would you say to those who say, look, this is a battle about the rule of international law, about the rule of law, and the US administration in expressing a desire to take over Greenland, Canada even, is breaking those norms? This is a completely different battle from the one you've described.
I think that what the U.S. is doing right now is realizing that things went terribly wrong. Catastrophically wrong decisions were made in the 1990s and early 2000s. And under this administration, the U.S. is attempting to address those and to restore its sources of strength.
We're talking about, say, things like immigration and so on, which the Secretary of State was talking about this morning.
That's right. That's right. And of course, one interesting thing that's happened is now everyone is saying that the rules-based international order had been underwritten by a form of power. Just because you're interested in making yourself strong doesn't mean that you reject all ideas of international norms and agreements, but we have to recognize that the rules won't enforce themselves. The rules are only enforced when strong countries
are party to. I'm not trying to boil it down to one example, but to take the most colourful example of the past year in some sense, do you think the US's aspiration, the Donald Trump's aspiration to take over Greenland, is justified?
Well, I'm not speaking for the Trump administration.
No, but you are speaking for a version of what you say conservative arguments are arguing for.
Well, I think the perspective that's underlying the direction of the Trump administration there is that the U.S. was committed to many, many, many things that were separate from its core national interests, and even dragging it down, all the while missing things that were happening in its own backyard. Why did they start talking about the Gulf of America at the beginning, or the Panama Canal? And then later Greenland, because bad things were happening right in the neighborhood, right under their nose. And if you can't identify those and restore your strength there, we can have another discussion about what international laws were implicated in each step of these moves and negotiations. That's I think a separate thing, because President Trump moves in unique ways.
He does. Can we? Because we don't have. But thank you very much for that, Radek. Your expressions were something beyond that I can summarize.
Because I think it's a complete falsehood to claim that mass migration was a left-wing project. It was for decades supported by Republican businessmen who wanted cheap labor from Latin America in the United States.
He's right. I agree.
Right. Also, it's complete falsehood to say that.
What about migration in Europe then?
Yeah,
same. Wanting economic growth by virtue of migration. We are an EPP government
in Poland. We've built a big and beautiful fence on our border with Belarus in 2 years, and it's completely effective. It's not a left-wing or right-wing issue. It's about we agree that we have the right to control who comes in and who doesn't, but it's not inherently a left-wing or right-wing idea. You can have open borders like in Australia and the United States in the 19th century, or you can have welfare state. You can't have both at the same time because you end up with a disaster. Also, it's completely false to say this was a hint about how supposedly the European Union is undemocratic. False. I was a member of the European Parliament. I was democratically elected. It's a completely democratic chamber. The European Commission is nominated by democratically elected governments of Europe. And
will you forgive me? What is the point you're making?
The point I'm making is that there are other forms of democracy than a national state democracy. We have constructed a democratically governed European Union, and this myth myth that gave us Brexit, that somehow Brussels bureaucrats are imposing directives on member states, is complete nonsense. That's not how the European Union works.
We might come on, though, to Ukraine in a moment, because that seems to me where one of the rifts in the West is most tested. But Secretary Clinton.
Well, as perhaps one of the few people who has actually been around since the end of the Second World War, let me add my version of history to the revisionism that I hear in not just this conversation, but so many other places. It is, for me, a blessing that freedom was expanded to include, in the United States, for example, the right of black people to be treated at least better than they had been for 400 or so years. It was a culmination of freedom for women to be given their rights much more fully than they had been. It was, I think, a dramatic recognition of human dignity for gay people to be able to be treated without fear and even marry, which to me is creating a family. So, you know, I understand conservative impulses. I understand we are fighting an ideological battle that is as old as time. There are those of us who are more comfortable in a more open, tolerant world. And there are those who have their concerns about it because they worry about the impact on existing institutions like the family, community, and others. So this really, yes, migration has been a huge flashpoint. More people were deported under my husband and Barack Obama without killing American citizens and without putting children into detention camps than were in the first Trump term or this first year of Trump's second term. So I think it's important to look at the facts, because very often the ideological impulse to try to protect the status quo or return making America great again in some nostalgic past that existed for white men and capitalist enterprise was not exactly open and welcoming to people who look like me and a lot of other people who are part of our national fabric. I have no argument with the necessity of trying to figure out how do we form families. I'm very proud of my family. I'm proud of my 3 grandchildren. I am proud to be part of that tradition. That doesn't mean everybody has to be. That doesn't mean everyone who doesn't have children is somehow an illegitimate human being. So how do we make the case in a positive way, not a bullying and very shameful way? So this debate that's going on is driven by an effort to control people, to control who we are, how we look, who we love. And I think we need to call it for what it is.
Secretary Clinton.
There is a legitimate reason to have a debate about things like migration. It went too far. It's been disruptive and destabilizing, and it needs to be fixed in a humane way with secure borders that don't torture and kill people, and how we're going to have a strong family structure, because it is at the base of civilization.
Secretary Clinton, so thank you for that. And you got.
You really mean that?
Yes, I do. I do, and you got several rounds of applause there. But I'm really interested in the line that our discussion is having already, which is a battle within the West between conservatism and liberalism. But I don't think we would be having this discussion at all if it weren't for some of the positions the US administration has taken. And let me take one of them, which is Ukraine, which is obviously at the center of the Munich discussions in the past couple of years. And the line that the Trump administration has taken in trying to resolve the Ukraine conflict following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, its apparent thrust to accept Russia's territorial encroachment on Ukraine. And to you, I absolutely, you know, I understand, and we've had various versions of it already, your characterization of a clash between conservative and liberal values being, you know, at the heart of what's going on in the West. But in this particular one, a security issue, one that involves international law, whether countries still respect those international laws laid down after the Second World War, do you think that that brings a new rift within the West? Ukraine, the US's position.
Are you talking to me?
Yes, I am.
I think that the Trump administration's position toward Ukraine is disgraceful. I think the effort to force Ukraine into a surrender deal with Putin is shameful. I think the effort that Putin and Trump are making to profit off the misery and death of the Ukrainian people is a historic error and corrupt to the nth degree. And so I believe Ukraine is fighting for our democracy and our values of freedom and civilization on the front lines, losing thousands of people and having their country destroyed by one man's mania to control them. And I think Trump either doesn't understand or could care less about that suffering. So that's what I think.
And so do you think he has destroyed the West, to go to our title?
He has betrayed the West. He's betrayed human values. He's betrayed the NATO Charter, the Atlantic Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. A lot of what has been done before to try to make sense of how difficult it is to restrain people who want unaccountable power. And none of us in this room, including all of us on this panel, would choose to live under a regime that was so unaccountable that it could act with impunity the way that Putin does, except that's who Trump is modeling himself
I don't
after.
think we would be having this debate under that kind of regime, for sure. We will come back, I suspect, to the conservatism and liberalism clash within the West, but thank you for that. Peter, do you agree that the Trump administration's actions on Ukraine have produced a rift in the West?
Well, first, I think you really don't like him.
You know, that is absolutely true. But I really, not only do I not like him, I don't like him because of what he's doing to the United States and the world. And I think you should take a hard look at it if you think that there is something good that will come out of it.
Peter,
what I think Trump is doing in America, I think it is reaction for something that, for some policies that really went too far from the regular people, too far from reality. So, you know, we saw the cancel culture. We saw the woke revolution. I don't agree with the gender revolution, the climate alarmism.
Which gender? Women having their rights?
No, let Peter go on.
I think there are two genders. So, but some of
us
think that there is more than one or more than two gender. I think there is male and female, and the rest probably is a social construct. So this is something that went too far.
But does that justify selling out the people of Ukraine who are on the front lines dying to save their freedom and their two genders, if that's what you're worried about?
Can I please finish my points? I'm sorry that it makes you nervous. I'm really sorry for that.
It makes me nervous. It makes me
but seriously, can we let Peter finish, please? Can we let Peter finish, please?
I have to say one more thing. You said that Ukraine fights for our future and for our freedom. I think first Ukraine fights for Ukraine's future, Ukraine's freedom, and Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. So we should help them, of course, but what I see in some people in the West, they are trying to help the Ukraine. But that's another question. I don't know if Trump's administration is helping the Ukraine to stop the war. I believe that there is such an approach. I don't see any other strong geopolitical player who would be able to force Russia to stop killing the Ukrainian people and stop destroying their country. I don't see. Maybe China, but China makes nothing. I don't know if the pressure, if Trump is forcing Russia in the way that they will stop the war. I don't know. I only see that the only Americans right at the moment can make it. I see the dialogue.
Do you think Europe could put more pressure on Russia, for example, by putting pressure on Turkey, by targeting the refineries of oil more, and so on?
I think Europe also makes some pressure. We release sanctions. We do what we can. But I think the Russians, they probably don't care. When I visited Ukraine, I saw the goodwill of all people in Ukraine. They were really united and willing to stop the war. But
they keep fighting. There seem to be.
They also made some steps that probably a year ago no one from them would allow to say or even suggest. Now they are ready to make some steps back. Now it's ball on the Russian side, but I don't see any goodwill on their side. So
indeed, we probably are agreed on that point. Peter, will you forgive me? I want to come on to Ivan, who's been writing and looking at this for a long time, from Sofia and other places.
Now, listen, there are two conversations, and I want to make 2 points. One is, if we really believe that it's about conservative versus liberal, then conservatism is very much about sovereignty and the national community. The way the American administration now defines the freedom of speech is basically the right of the American technological companies. If you're conservative and if you're a nationalist, you're not going to allow this. And there is a major clash of values. Listen, probably the business interest of some of the company is to address people with artificial intelligence. If you're basically going part of the community, are you going to allow this? And I'm saying this because this is part of the tensions that now we have between Europe and the United States. It is easy to be a nationalist. The problem is that the moment you start to be highly nationalistic, you are triggering the nationalism of others. And this was, by the way, very clearly seen when some of the far-right parties in Europe very strongly opposed President Trump on Greenland, because for them, land is not real estate. And I'm saying this because in this conservative position, there is a major contradiction. And the second problem, which I found really important on this, is I believe in the intentions of the American president to try to stop killing. This is novel. There are more than 1.5 million people being killed or wounded. The problem is that you cannot solve this totally bracketing the question, is there a moral responsibility? Are they equally important? I remember during there was this famous anecdote when the Versailles Treaty was signed. One of the members of the German delegation went to the French Prime Minister and said, Mr. Prime Minister, in 100 years, probably people are going to have a different view of who is responsible for this war. And then the French Prime Minister said, for sure, but nobody is going to claim that it was Belgium that invaded Germany. And I'm saying this because, in my view, it's very important what we define as peace. And this is not only about security guarantees. You cannot have peace if you're destroying the moral integrity of a nation.
Okay, so Ivan, thank you very much. And you also brought us into one of the other points of disagreement between the US and Europe, which is over the definition of freedom of speech, or the understanding of that. I realize we have this odd role in this late-night panel of exploring disagreement rather than trying to get rid of it, which is the purpose of most of the conference. I want to throw then one other controversial topic in, which is Gaza and the reactions to that. And I would like people's views of whether that represents a profound difference in values within the West, or is not, is a matter of history, of a matter of smaller relationships than that. But because many countries outside any definition of the West see this as an example of Western hypocrisy, of claiming to uphold certain values and then not holding Israel to task for those. I would like people's views. Radek, I'm going to start with you.
All right, I'll come to Gaza, but let me just say that we need to stick to the proper definition of conservatism. Edmund Burke was a conservative. Winston Churchill was a conservative. Sir Roger Scruton was a friend of mine. He was a conservative. Maggie Thatcher was a conservative. I wrote for Bill Buckley's National Review. He was a conservative. And I don't think any of these people would approve of what's going on now.
I can sympathize with what you're saying, and yet I would find it surprising if any conservative thought there was a single definition of conservatism. By its very nature.
On Gaza,
But we are late at night, but we're still not going to go too much into the philosophy of conservatism. But I take your point. Gaza.
I personally believe that the Middle East should be run by the United States as impartially and as successfully as hitherto.
Irony is a really difficult thing to risk late at night on anything that is broadcast.
I have to come back on to the earlier question first.
Go on.
I mean, let's talk about the plan for the resolution of the Russia-Ukraine war that's offered by those who propose that it be continued. There is no plan. There is no plan for a successful ending of the war on the battlefield. There is going to be no ending of the war on the battlefield. But the moment that President Trump called for negotiations to happen, many voices just tried to put him into the box of being a Putin apologist. By the way, it was that point which led to the abuse of the American technological platforms by the American left, kicking off the President of the United States when he was still sitting as president. I don't think it's the fault of the American technology companies that they produced platforms that everyone wanted to debate on. That's really not the issue. That's not the freedom of speech issue that we're talking about.
That encourage polarization.
That we're talking about in the United States. But it is a problem when political parties in Europe are excluded from participation in debates, and I'm very grateful to the Munich Security Conference for hosting this debate. That's the issue, and in some cases, legacy media networks are perpetuating that. So it's not just a question of the American tech platforms.
The media is still plural and very plural.
Yeah, but political parties have been excluded. And this is a precise issue. Political parties have been excluded from public debate in Europe. And by the way,
yeah, we exclude fascists.
Today.
Let me just.
Anyway,
I just want to stick, broadly to the title that we have. That we have the indulgence of post 10 p.m. I think, but the point, the counter to what you're saying is that peace without principle, first, won't last as peace, but second, betrays the principles on which the West is founded, and therefore isn't worth it. It undermines the West. That would be the resonant counter that Ukrainians and others are putting forward.
Let's see what happens rather than trying to box President Trump and the administration into a corner and smearing them as Putin apologists who are about to sell out a country.
Well, he did put up a Putin picture in the White House.
Right.
But I thought you were grateful for the new demands that the American administration has put on Europe. I mean, I think that's something that we're all agreeing has been something.
I don't have a Putin picture in my house.
For now.
That's good.
For now.
I think, yeah.
No, I think.
I am still trying to find people who want to rise to this one word, Gaza.
No,
which is an unusual experience for me.
I think Ukraine is at the heart of what the West division is, and I think that's why both Radek and Gladden went back to it, because first of all, the Ukraine war started after Trump left, so anything he said on social media that got him kicked off for a while had nothing to do with Ukraine. There is a plan. The plan is give the Ukrainians Tomahawks. Give them more missiles for their Patriot defense systems. Allow them to inflict more damage beyond the border into Russia. That's when they began to actually think about coming to the negotiating table, when Ukraine was able to reach targets that were inside Russia. Inflict enough pain. I mean, it apparently is not enough pain to have hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers killed and injured. That is not enough pain for Putin. But inflict pain on the refineries, inflict pain on the missile sites, inflict pain that will actually create the conditions for a better negotiation. And, know, it is
allowed that
it
too,
is
though.
very.
And what's
I want to come to Peter and Ivan quickly, and then we're going to leave. The MSC has produced a clock. I thought at the beginning the rules-based order had broken down enough. We're going to do without a clock, but we have a clock, and we have time for questions. Peter and Ivan, quickly on these points.
These points, well, first I think we should try to learn to listen to each other and not to label the ideological opponent as the public enemy. We are here on the West, and let's respect ourselves in the differences we have. So I don't really like such a labeling as fascist. I think it's
there are fascists in the world.
Well, maybe there are, but
including in Europe.
I think there are. It ended some 70 or 80 years ago.
No, it hasn't.
Hopefully, this is something I don't really like. That every day, every time I hear labeling someone as fascist or Nazist or whatever, I think we should calm down, because this is dividing the society. We are maybe you are smart people. I'm not as smart as you, but so we should try to learn to talk to each other again, because this is something that went too far. I don't want to talk about the Ukraine, because it's the whole day talks, important talks. I listened to President Zelensky, what he's saying, and he's got the horrible position. I'm not sure if Ukraine is able to use the military to beat Russia. That would be perfect. That would be perfect. But I think we should be realistic. So the first should be the ceasefire. I don't know how to make it. I think that I don't want to repeat myself. That
no, all right. Thank you for the points you made, Ivan.
I want to say something on hypocrisy, because it's a very important thing. Once, 3 or 4 years ago, we have this big project on hypocrisy, and we visited several countries.
Can you just say who we is? I mean,
there was a group of academics, and do you know, if you want to visit a country and to get the meeting at the highest level, put hypocrisy in the title. There is no world leader outside of the West who is not going to meet you, and for good reasons. I'm saying this because, in my view, and this was very clear in Davos, is there are two different versions of liberal hypocrisy. One is the one that came from Carney, and to be honest, Carney very much identified with the criticism of the liberal hypocrisy. He said, listen, people from the non-Western countries, they're saying, yes, everything is equal, but you're treating Ukraine and Gaza differently. He's right. And there was also President Trump. By the way, President Trump cannot be accused of being hypocritical. But no, this is true, because his major argument is the biggest hypocrisy of the international order is that countries are equal. They're not equal. They are strong countries and they are weak countries. The only problem is that we know that countries are not equal. I'm Bulgarian. It never came to my mind that we're equal to the United States. But there is this idea of hypocritical idea of equality, which is so important in order to have any order. And what I'm afraid is that the moment when we say the world without hypocrisy, we're saying simply the world in which there is only power. And from this point of view, you're redefining American exceptionalism as being exceptionally powerful. But then there's a risk. Be sure that if somebody more powerful is going to come, you're not going to have a moral authority anymore. Because in the world in which everything is about power, where is the reasons for the small countries to distinguish between the United States and China? Where is to distinguish between this and that? Yeah. And in my view, this is the problem of hypocrisy. There is one thing that could be even worse than liberal hypocrisy, and there is the world with no hypocrisy at all.
Ivan, thank you very much. And you took us to some of the central points there. And there's been a huge debate, as everyone here will know, about whether Mark Carney was right in his resonance speech at Davos to say that Western countries had been hypocritical. Okay, let's go to questions. I'm going to take a whole batch of them and then use them as provocations for the panel to respond. Right, so let me take several. We'll start here and then there. If you could say your name
Yes.
That would be great.
Hello, I'm Sigge Bäcklund from the Scandinavian Weekly Day and Time, and thank you for lively discussion. I was also here at the event yesterday, the night event, and I was listening to Representative Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who stated that about the old rules-based order, that we carved out exceptions to our values and our rules. Eventually, our exceptions became our own rules. So we've been talking a lot about critique of the rules-based order from the right. But I wonder what you think about this way of characterizing the old rules-based order from the left. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's one here.
Yeah, I got a microphone.
Sorry, there's a woman. Sorry, I can't see.
Yeah, hi. Should I?
Yes, please go, and then I'll come to the
Richard
front.
Wolf from Deutsche Welle. Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the kind of terminology around values relating to the West and civilization relating to the West. So we heard a lot about values from the Biden administration. We've got values in the title here. Marco Rubio, I did a count in the transcript, he used the word civilization 12 times. So I'd like to hear from the panel who's more up for Western values and who's more up for Western civilization in the discourse. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And there's obviously been huge debate since this morning about whether Marco Rubio was championing only Western civilization. Right, here in the front.
Do we identify ourselves? It doesn't matter. The definitions here are confusing me because it's not conservative versus liberals in the United States. I mean, the discussion largely centers around conservatives are dead. You can talk to a lot of them in the GOP and the Senate, and they don't dare open their mouths. So I think if we're going to talk about values, we have to look at the definitions of who is determining the values. I don't think anyone would call Trump a conservative. You could call him a demagogue, you could call him a self-enricher, but he doesn't operate on principles, so I don't think it's useful to talk about Trumpism as conservative versus liberals. And then what caused the society in the U.S. to break down? It's as much about conservatives outsourcing jobs to China, which caused huge segments of the population to lose their prospects for their children, which had nothing to do with two genders, and so or three genders. You don't have to like that. You can anyway. So I think we're sort of arguing around the bush because there are false divisions being proposed here, and what we have is demagoguery and populism up against a lot of confusions within the Democratic Party, liberals, progressives, within the GOP, frightened, scared conservatives who don't espouse conservatism because they would be attacked by the populists in the White House. So I think it's a mistake to argue as if there's a simple separation here, or it all has to do with three genders.
Thank you very much indeed. We have one on the back and we have one over here. And then, sorry, one right here, he was the most persistent and got himself in a spotlight.
I have a question to Secretary Clinton. It was 15 years ago that you ratified here at the Security Conference together with Sergei Lavrov the New START treaty, and I wanted to know whether you sometimes get nostalgic about those times when you think back. And then maybe a more concrete question looking forward, do you think that there is any room for nuclear proliferation when the war in Ukraine is still ongoing?
Thank you very much for those, and here in the front.
In the front?
Yeah, in the front, yeah.
I have a question, Łukasz Pawłowski, Polish MFA. I have a question about the yeah, Thank you very much, Minister.
It's about equality.
Yes.
Sorry, I can't see.
So let me tell you about the successes of Poland. No, my question is brief, but the answer may be difficult. The current administration is trying to redefine what it means to be American, the American identity, from a notion that what brings together the Americans is a set of ideas, to the notion that what brings them together is, the number of generations that you lived in the country. My question is to Senator Clinton, because that's the argument the vice presidents made. What would be your response to that? And to quote him, America is not just an idea. We are a particular place with a particular people and a particular set of beliefs and way of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, everyone is a silhouette from here. Let me just take two more. Yep, there's a hand up there.
Is there somebody from the Polish Foreign Ministry?
Yeah. And then there's someone in the back.
Hi, I'm Melanie Ward. I'm not from the Polish Foreign Ministry, sorry. I'm a British MP. I wonder what the panel makes of the fact that President Trump's administration is spending $200 million supporting far-right and MAGA-friendly think tanks in Europe. Is that democratic?
Thank you very much. And over here. And then I'm going to briefly sum up.
Hi, my name is Catherine Eckenberger. I've got a question to the Deputy Prime Minister, please, of the Czech Republic. You spoke about sovereignty, thank you. What does respect for sovereignty require between democratic European states? In a long-standing dispute between friendly democracies, is reliance on courts and us? Or is there also a responsibility to seek political dialogue and reconciliation, please?
Okay, thank you. And sorry, was there one more? I'm seeing dramatic gestures over there, but everyone is just a silhouette. Okay, I think, you're right, one more, yep.
I'll take the dramatic gesture. Paige Alexander from the Carter Center, formerly USAID. Curious what you think about soft power in terms of all of this.
Okay, thanks very much.
May I also?
Sorry?
Sorry, yeah, here, to the side. I'm Anja Wielaschak, I'm with the German Tagesspiegel, and we've been talking about Western values throughout the conference, and Madam Secretary, I'd like to ask you, I'm the mother of a daughter, and it absolutely horrifies me to see what the Epstein files have brought out. And I wanted to ask you, what does it say about Western values when Western leaders have perpetuated and participated in these horrific abuses of minors and girls?
Thank you very much. We have gone everywhere from New Start to Epstein. Via some fundamental questions of the critique of rules-based order from the left, of civilization versus values, of conservatism versus liberalism in the US, and other things. Secretary Clinton, as there are a couple directly to you, let me start with you, and then everyone else gets about a minute, and you get a minute and a tiny bit.
Yeah, I heard three in particular. To the last question, it's horrifying, and we're hoping that there will be continued release every day that passes. That doesn't mean, as our news commentators say every day in the United States, it's because someone's name is there, they committed a crime. But I think there's a lot of very troubling and really horrific information coming out. Today, it came out that Steve Bannon was trying to get Jeffrey Epstein to help him overthrow Pope Francis. I guess that was part of the civilizational
true conservatism.
True conservatism. So it is something that needs to be totally transparent. I've called for many, many years for everything to be put out there so people can not only see what is in them, but also, if appropriate, hold people accountable. We'll see what happens. On the New START treaty, which we were, the foreign minister and I were talking about this just backstage. We actually signed, President Obama signed the New START treaty in Prague. And it was, one in a series of efforts to restrain the proliferation of nuclear weapons, to control the U.S. and Russian arsenals. And I think it's a very big mistake for it to have been allowed to expire. I know that there was an offer, apparently, from the Russians to extend it a year, during which there could be some negotiations. The Trump administration refused that. And their response was that they wanted to try to get China and other nuclear weapons countries into a regime, which more power to them if they could ever manage that and if it could be achieved. But I am very worried because Trump also, he tweets, or I guess he X's or whatever he does on social media late at night, and one of his recent ones was to resume nuclear testing, underground nuclear testing, and I think that would be a terrible development. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen, and I'm hoping that there can be some efforts to reinstate some kind of nuclear arms agreements. With respect to this question, if you think about the 13 colonies, that was a creed. It was an idea. It was a philosophy. It did not include the entire continental United States, let alone Alaska and Hawaii. It was based on the founders' deep understanding of human nature, of philosophy, of what we might call liberal thought, as they created a new country. And, when I hear President or Vice President Vance say things like that about how it's a nation, it's blood and soil, and all the ways that he talks about it, I think to myself, I never knew he was such a firm advocate for Native Americans, because the idea that you would have an approach toward the United States that ripped away our founding documents, our founding philosophies, is so contrary to the way I understand American history. So I think that it's not only wrong historically, it is a political device that I think is very dangerous and should be rejected whole cloth.
Thank you. Gladden.
I'm a citizen of the Osage Tribal Nation, a Native American tribe in Oklahoma. I voted for President Trump and Vice President Vance, as did the majority of our tribe. So I can only speak for myself and us, but at any rate, I think he has not used the phrase blood and soil, and this is not an accurate characterization of the thought that's going on in the administration. There's one thing on the panel I can agree with, however, and this is your point, that conservatism has changed. Absolutely. In the 1990s and 2000s, there was basically a conspiracy of the center-left and the center-right, both to sell out the country. From the center-left, we got a social progressivism, which, yes, in the post-war period, had been responsible for important advances in American life. Native Americans were the last to get the vote, actually, even after women. So that's very important. But it didn't know where to stop. Similarly, the free market conservatives. There's a lot of things that the market does well. They also didn't know where to stop. So an important corrective had to come. In Europe, I have to say that corrective came from someone who made correct decisions when it came to migration, family, and also the importance of peace. And I hate to say it, but you can either acknowledge that Prime Minister Orban was right 10 years ago, or you can wait another 10 years and then realize it. The conservative voices, including his...
We have to see whether he wins the next election. I'm going to stop you on that.
His voice has been excluded.
Yeah. From what?
Decisions of the European Commission, which continues to go for a qualified majority.
The European Commission, I think, feels that Hungary has quite a lot of voice. Radek, make your single best point.
What?
Make your best point.
Sure. Oh, all right. Someone asked about Lavrov. Hillary didn't answer, so I will. I had a relationship with Lavrov based on telling each other Soviet-era jokes. So there was a competition in the Soviet Union for the best political joke. First prize, 15 years. Someone asked here about MAGA think tanks. My take on this is the following. So So until recently, we had an unspoken agreement not to interfere in allied countries' party political rivalries, right? Now, President Trump received our populist candidate for the president between the first and the second round of our presidential election. So in the old days, we didn't interfere, but we did interfere on behalf of democracy in the politics of autocracies. And now it's the other way around. And actually, Prime Minister Orban has created a program.
What's the point you're making with that? That it's fair now, or?
No, I'm saying it's completely outrageous.
Right.
And in Poland, for example, it's irrational because in Poland was for decades the most pro-American country in Europe. And the United States had a wonderful situation in which the government and the opposition, either way, was competing who would be more pro-American. Once you start choosing sides, a different dynamic will start.
It does.
But
almost out of time. We're all facing the same
on
clock.
Civilization.
No, Radek, I'm so sorry because you will be eloquent on this.
I have an important point on the Western civilization.
No, well, we do because they will cut the live feed. All right, you have 1 minute on civilization, but we do actually have to let people go, and I want Peter and Ivan to have a word.
We're running out of the time.
Censorship.
Censorship. No, rules-based order to which we have all subscribed. Peter.
I see that the fundamental divide of the West is not between the West and the rest of the world, but within the West itself. As I'm listening to this, I think there was some question about, or where was it, about the national sovereignty. Do I remember that well? But so
there was,
yes. So I think that the national sovereignty and the sovereign nation state is the only platform that can guarantee the democracy, because this is the only possible way how to have the cultural continuity and how to bring the power into some limited intentions. If we are not sovereign country, if we are lost in some multilateral organizations, then there is a risk.
The EU is a democracy.
Well, EU is consisted by democratic national
and a democratically elected parliament.
Democratic elected parliament without any legislative initiative. So this is the only parliament in the world that don't have the initiative to bring the law, to bring the legislation.
Yeah, because the legislation is brought forward by the Council and the Commission.
Yes, but tell me, what is the connection between the voter and the Commission? Is there any voter from the Czech Republic who has some influence on who will be the Polish commissioner? I think there is no connection.
Commissioners are appointed by democratically elected the governments.
But these commissioners are.
That's why they love QMB.
They probably don't veto to each other, so they have. Everyone has some portfolio, and
like any other government.
Yeah, it is like a government, but even the national government is based on elections and some majority.
As is the Commission.
I don't think it is in the same.
In your country, ministers are not directly elected; they are selected by Parliament or by the Prime Minister.
In my country, there is a majority in Parliament that gives
and a majority in the European Parliament too.
Well,
which appoints the Commission, as you know.
But my position is closer to the voter than the position of Euro Commissioner.
Of course, it's a continental system.
It is, and I don't say it is an undemocratic system.
Good.
I don't say that. Right. I don't say that. I just say that the democracy. That's the reason why we have to have the national sovereign states. That's it.
Ivan.
Yeah, just 2 points. One is, and this is a really interesting question about the civilizational story, because in the European tradition, civilization was not in plural. European civilization was created as a universal, with everything good and bad that goes with this, colonialism too. The problem is how you're redefining this. If we are going to believe that the clashes between different civilizations and so on, exactly how we are going to define it. And how we are going to define it now when, listen, part of our civilizations are nation states that speak very different languages. So this is not India, this is not China, this is not the United States. Secondly, all this history, as I'm always saying, this European Union, probably we have common dreams. Our nightmares are totally national. And you can see in the moment of crisis how much this is. The moment when somebody tried to define European civilization as something that have been always existing, cannot work. And by the way, you know what Gandhi, when he was asked what he thinks about European civilization, his answer, this is a good idea. No, and I do believe this is critically important. This is a real question. And my last point is, listen, we're talking about things, what Trump said or what anybody said. We're in a moment in which suddenly people start to believe that individual immortality is an option. The mortality of the nations, if you're Bulgarian, can I be sure that in 100 years anybody is going to speak Bulgarian anymore? We're talking about the replacement of migrants. AI is going to replace more people than migrants, believe me. This is the other great replacement. We are going to redefine everything. We are going to redefine what is a nation, what is a civilization, what is the West. And it's normally have been like this in a different periods of time. And just to say on something much more positive, if President Trump was really insisting on the civilizational approach, the only country in Europe he should not have deprived of Greenland is Denmark. They have been as tough on migration as Mr. Orban. They are as social cohesion as you can imagine. They're economically very competitive. They are not the most ethnically diverse place. So if this is the case, at least we agree that Greenland can be left for them. On that, we have not done justice to all the terrific questions we were asked, including the very precise one about MAGA spending in Europe, which I suspect will come back up the agenda. But we have done justice to the question of whether there are rifts in the West. We've been absolutely united on one point, which is the value of having the freedom to have this kind of discussion. I will myself go away with a stab of guilt for not allowing Radek his undoubted eloquence on the subject of the civilization. But we were teetering on the edge of huge subjects on which everyone here could be incredibly eloquent for much longer than we have. We've run out of time. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, my panel.